For today's Dhamma talk, I've actually selected this title called Self-Restraint and Self-Discipline. And when one mentions self-restraint, I think most people will actually think that self-restraint, it is something that's actually relevant only to the monastics, monks and nuns. Being self-restrained, in body, speech, and mind, and they have to follow the patimokkha, and also, self-discipline. It's actually what the Buddha normally calls his teaching, Dhamma-Vinaya, and Vinaya itself is actually what we call discipline. So when somebody mentions, self-restraint and self-discipline, is something that's more relevant to the monastics, monks, and nuns. But if you look at the suttas from the Pali Canon, you find that self-restraint is actually something that it is actually an integral part, an integral component. It's something that's really essential, for progress, on the path to liberation. When we actually walk the path, the spiritual path. It is something that is really critical and something that's really important, that's relevant for both monks and nuns, as well as for lay people as well. Say, for example, when you actually perform dana, if you read the Anguttara Nikaya from the Book of Seven, the Buddha actually says when you perform dana, it is very important for you to be able to restrain yourself, in terms of to ensure that that your mind, is actually not invaded, by lobha, dosa, and moha. If you actually make the wish, that the dana itself, will actually be a cause for you to be reborn in the lower, in the heavenly realm, then that itself is actually not then there's actually no self-restraint. If there is no self-restraint, then what will happen is you find that you will actually do something that you're not able to catch your intention intention before you actually do something. For example, when it comes to observing the 5 precepts, if you find that you actually break your precepts, because there's no self-restraint. So that's why when we find this self-restraint is actually something that's really important. Let me first of all share with you this sutta from AN 8.6 called the Lokavipatti Sutta, which is actually the failings of the world. Okay. So in this sutta itself, the Buddha actually highlights the importance, why it's important for us to practice self-restraint. Because here the Buddha actually says that there is these 8 worldly conditions that spin after the world, okay? And the world spins after these 8 worldly conditions, okay? So the Buddha says that in this world that we live in terms of, we are always besieged by these 8 worldly conditions, whether it's gain or loss, or status or disgrace, or sensual praise, or pleasure and pain. And we suffer, because we are not able to actually ensure, that our mind is not actually affected by lobha, dosa, and moha, because of these 8 worldly conditions that spin after us. Okay, here the Buddha actually highlights to us how important it is for us to actually have self-restraint. And if you see from Anguttara Nikaya 1.31, the Buddha actually tells the monks, that I do not know of any other single thing that brings such woe to the mind as one that's untamed, and unguarded and unrestrained. So such a mind actually brings brings great woe, brings big suffering to us. And the Buddha says that he doesn't know of any other single thing that brings such bliss to the mind, that if the mind is restrained. So that's why in this case you find that the Buddha actually highlights that self-restraint is actually something that's indeed very important. Whether we perform whether we perform dana, sila, or bhavana, in our daily lives, we need to ensure that our mind is restrained and is not affected, by loba, dosa, and moha. And if you see from the suttas, there are actually many accounts, of how well restrained, the Buddha is, when it comes to someone scolding or someone abusing us, and that we can see from this Samyutta Nikaya 7.2. There is this sutta called the Akoso Sutta, where there is this Brahmin by the name of Akosaka, okay, and he was actually very angry and displeased with the Buddha, because one of his family members actually had renounced and became a monk. So he went to see the Blessed One, and he started scolding the Buddha with abuses and reproaches. Okay, and the Buddha, was actually very well restrained, and he actually responded by actually asking him, do you receive visits, from friends and colleagues, blood relations and others? Okay, and this Brahmin says, yes, sometimes such people do come and visit me. And do you serve them with solid food, soft food, and savories? Then the Buddha says, yes, sometimes, And so the Buddha says, supposing they do not accept what you offer, then who does it belong to? So then of course, then the Brahmin says, if they do not accept, then it belongs to me. So the Buddha says that whatever abuse, scolding, or reviling that you actually hurl at us, we do not accept that from you. So whatever scolding that you hurl, actually belongs to you. So we can see from this sutta, that the Buddha, is actually very self-restrained, and that itself, is something that's actually very important for us to progress on the spiritual path. Okay, so whether it is monastic or whether it is lay people alike, we need to actually ensure, that there's self-restraint, in our body, speech, and mind. So similarly, in this sutta of this Majjhima Nikaya 22, there's this sutta called the snake simile. Again, the Buddha also highlights the importance of self-restraint. So the Buddha says, if there's others who actually abuse, scold, or insult you, one will not actually feel any annoyance. One should not. He says the Buddha will not feel any annoyance or dejection or displeasure in his heart. Okay, and if for that reason, anybody respects, revere or venerate the Perfect One, the Buddha also would not feel elated because of that, because the Buddha feels that that even if someone actually scolds and reviles him, then he feels that it's actually the scolding is actually towards this body and mind. So there's actually no self. So that's why the Buddha actually highlights to us that even if anybody were to scold or abuse you, then it is very important. Then you should not actually feel any annoyance or dejection because of that. Okay. So actually, the Buddha in the sutta itself, actually highlights to us the importance of self-restraint. Okay, the Buddha actually highlights that there are these four efforts, for us in exerting our effort. Okay, in our practice of the Dhamma, the Buddha actually highlights that these four efforts. And what are these four efforts? It is the effort to restrain, okay, the effort to give up, the effort to develop, and an effort to preserve. And the Buddha says, what is this effort to restrain? Okay, the Buddha says that the effort to restrain here is actually when you generate the effort, exert the mind and strive such that the unskillful qualities don't arise. This is called the effort to restrain. So self-restraint here actually refers to the effort that you make, to ensure that that unwholesome or unskillful qualities don't arise in your mind. Okay, so again, in this sutta, SN 3.5, again, the Buddha again highlights the importance, you know, of self-restraint, you know, restraining your body, speech, and mind. Okay, here there is this conversation between King Pasenadi, you know, and the Buddha. Okay, and here this King Pasenadi of the Kosala kingdom, right, he actually told the Buddha that there was this thought that when he was alone, he actually thought of this thought, you know, who have themselves protected and who leave themselves unprotected. Okay, then this King Pasenadi told the Buddha, right, he says that those who engage in bodily misconduct, you know, or verbal or mental misconduct, they leave themselves unprotected. Okay, so this king Pasenadi told the Buddha, you know, that even though there's a squadron of elephant troops or cavalry troops or chariot troops or infantry troops that actually protect someone, they actually are unprotected, you know, because that is only an external protection and not an internal one. Therefore, they leave themselves unprotected. Okay, but those who actually engage in good bodily conduct, good verbal conduct and mental conduct, they actually have themselves protected. So here so here the king is saying that you know, even if you have, you know, a whole troop of elephants and troops and chariot troops, you know, an army and infantry army that protect you, that is only an external protection, you know. But if you engage in bodily misconduct, you know, misconduct by body, speech, and mind, then you actually are actually unprotected. That's what the king, you know, told the Buddha, and the Buddha actually agrees with the king. So yes, that's the way it is, you know. The Buddha says that restraint, you know, with the body, speech, and mind is good, you know. Restraint and everywhere conscientious, one is actually protected. So again, we see that here, being restrained in bodies and speech and mind is actually highly emphasized and highly praised by the Blessed One, because it is something that is important for us to progress on the spiritual path. Like I mentioned earlier, whether you actually do perform dana, sila, or bhavana, you know, this self-restraint is very important, you know, because if you perform dana, you know, and you know you are not restrained, you know, in your mind, and you actually let thoughts of greed, you know, invade you. For example, you know, you feel that, oh, if I perform this dana, you know, then I have lots of merits, you know. So the Buddha says that if you do that, you know, then your rebirth is actually only in the lower heavenly realms. And even if you practice, for example, if you need to observe your sila, you know, your morality, if you actually are not restrained, you know, in your morality, how are you going to actually, if you're not restrained in your body, speech, and mind, how are you actually going to ensure, you know, that you do not break the 5 precepts? You know, more often than not, for example, you know, we hear people say, you know, before I even realize it, you know, I've actually, you know, swiped at the mosquito. You know, or before I realize it, you know, I have actually scolded back, you know, or I actually have used harsh language, you know, to retort, you know, and to respond back, you know, to the harsh speech that's spoken to me, you know, because there's no restraint, you know, you don't actually restrain yourself, you know, well enough before you actually you know, perform these actions, and before you know it, you already have broken the precepts. Okay, and even when it comes to meditation as well, you know, just restraint is so important. You know, like every day we are faced with, you know, like I mentioned just now, the 8 worldly conditions, the gain and loss, you know, and all this, the 8 worldly conditions that we face in this world. If you are not restrained, then whenever you feel any adverse conditions, you know, then you find that, you know, you feel very dejected, you know, and very depressed, and because of that, you know, dosa actually overtakes your mind. You know, and you suffer, you know, because of that, because you are not restrained in your mind. So, for example, you know, like maybe you find that, despite the hard work you do, you don't get the bonus you want, or maybe you don't get the promotion you want, or you have been expecting, and you find that what you have wished for, doesn't actually materialize, or maybe you feel that, someone has been, there has been disrepute, that's being spoken about you, that actually causes you a lot of suffering, these 8 worldly conditions, which are actually swaying us, when in these worldly conditions. So if you're not self-restrained in this, then you find that, you actually suffer a lot, So that's why the Buddha says it's very important for you to actually have restraint, in body, speech, and mind. And this itself, he has actually highlighted to King Personality. That's why in Dhammapada verse 391, the Buddha actually highlights again, whoever does no wrong in body, speech, and mind, and restrained in 3 ways, he is actually what I call a true Brahmin, So the Buddha says being restrained, is actually very, very important, It's not just for the monks, or monastics or nuns, but, it is equally applicable for lay people, when we walk the spiritual path. So again, we see from this sutta, AN 3.52, AN 3.52, here, we actually we see this interesting conversation between the Buddha, Blessed One, and 2 old men, who were advanced in years and, about 120 years old, And this happened in Savatthi, in Jeta's Grove, in Anapindika's monastery. They went to see the Blessed One, the Buddha. And here, these 2 men actually confessed to the Buddha. He says that, we are very old, feeble, and towards the end of our lives. And we have not done any, admirable deeds, no great merits, and we have done no skillful deeds, and no deeds that will allay our fears. So this is like, for those, who actually have not done any merits, and towards the end, you find that, it's towards the end of your lives, and you actually feel suddenly very anxious. Just like before you travel, you discover that your passport has not been renewed, or you have not enough cash to travel. That kind of anxiety and fear, because you haven't done any good merits prior to this. So these 2 men decided to see the Buddha. So he asked the Buddha, "Can you actually save us? Because we haven't done much. So what are we supposed to do now? And we are already so old." And the Buddha says, yes, indeed, Brahmin, you are feeble and old, and you're really coming to the end of your last stage of your life, and you have done no merits, And he told that these 2 Brahmin that this world, is actually on fire with aging, illness, and death, So the Buddha told these 2 men that this world was actually on fire, burning with fire. By burning with what? Burning with aging, illness, and death. So here is Buddha says, with the world, the Buddha told these 2 men, these old men, with the world, burning, and raging with fire, with fire of aging, illness, and death, the Buddha advises 2 men to practice restraint of body, speech, and mind. If you practice restraint over speech and mind, will be one's shelter, cave, and island, refuge after death in the world beyond. So the Buddha is actually asking these 2 men to ensure that you please practice restraint over your body, speech, and mind. And because the world is burning with aging, illness, and death, and there's no certainty, when death, will actually come knocking on the door. So you better, practice restraint, over the body, speech, and mind. And for us to practice restraint over the body, speech, and mind, right, then the question now is, how do we actually practice, how do we actually guard, ourselves to be restrained in body, speech, and mind, okay? So from here, from Anguttara Nikaya 3.105, here, the Buddha actually tells the monks, he actually gave a very good, remarkable simile. He actually says that if the roof of a house is actually poorly roofed, what will happen whenever there's actually rain, rainfall, then the Buddha says that because of the poorly roofed house, right, the water will actually trickle and seep through, the roof and right through to the beam, as well as to the to the walls, and all this will get soggy and wet. So the Buddha says, in the same way, if you do not protect your mind, your bodily actions and your verbal actions and your mental actions will similarly be unprotected as well. So the Buddha says, in order for you to be restrained in body, speech, and mind, it is very important that you actually guard your mind, to actually guard your mind. To make sure that your mind is always guarded at all times. Okay, so we can see that for you to be restrained in body, speech, and mind, first of all, you must guard your mind, and that itself is actually very true. Because if you see, from Dhammapada verse number 1, the Buddha says that the mind is actually the forerunner of all things. So, mind is actually very critical here. It's actually the forerunner of all phenomena. The mind actually comes first. So the Buddha says it's just like the roof of a house. So if it's not properly roofed, then all the roof, the pillars, the walls, everything will get soggy. Just like if your mind is not protected, then your speech, your body, speech, as well as your mental actions, are all going to be very, very tainted, and with defilements. Okay, so now the next question is, since guarding the mind is so important, right? So how is it that you actually guard your mind? How do you guard your mind actually? So we can see that actually from Samyutta Nikaya 35.93, which is very interesting here. It actually talks about this sutta called the Vaya Sutta, or it's actually a pair, And here the Buddha, actually gave a very very remarkable teaching, about dependent arising, of phenomena. Here the Buddha says, in dependence on the I and forms, the I consciousness arise. So the coming together of the I, form, and consciousness, there's actually contact. And because there's contact, there is feelings, perceptions, and intentions, or what we call volitional formations, which is sankhara, okay? So you can see here, if you really want to guard your mind, where is the mind? The mind is actually feeling, perceptions, and intentions, right? Okay, there's three components of what appear in your mind, okay? But feelings and perceptions you can't control, because whenever you actually come into contact with something, whether you feel pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, you can't control. And the perceptions also you can't control because it depends on how your mind has been conditioned before, okay? So whatever that, what can be controlled, and what we can exert to have restraint is actually the intention, which is actually the sankhara, okay? So, and sankhara itself, actually manifests, in terms of your body, speech, and mind, right? Okay, whether you decide to speak harshly, or whether you speak politely or softly, or whether you intend to break the 5 precepts, that itself comes from sankhara, right? So in order for you to actually to control your sankhara, first of all, if you go back to this cycle, all these actually originate from where? Originate from the I, right? Because I comes in contact with the form, and because of that there's consciousness and there's contact. So the Buddha says, in order for you to guard your mind, you must actually ensure that you establish your mindfulness on the 6 sense doors, which is actually your 6 sense basis, okay? And that itself is actually confirmed, from this Samyutta Nikaya 35.199 here. The Buddha actually gave a very interesting simile in this sutta called the Kuma Sutta, the tortoise. The Buddha actually gave, a simile. Say, monks, once upon a time, there was this hard-shelled tortoise that was actually looking for food, in the evening along the shore of a lake, and a jackal, a jackal is like a fox, a jackal. He was actually looking for food as well, and he was also along the shore of this lake, and this tortoise saw the jackal from afar. He saw his tortoise and looking for food. Of course, this tortoise was very smart, right? He started to withdraw its forelegs and its neck, into its own shell, and it remains perfectly quiet and still, and not do anything at all, okay? And this jackal also saw the tortoise from afar, looking for food. So straight away, he knew that there's food, right? So he went to the tortoise, and upon reaching the tortoise, he actually hovered around the tortoise, He actually started to hang around it. He said that as soon as this tortoise stretches out, or another of his 4 limbs, and his neck, you will actually seize the tortoise right there, tear off his flesh and eat it, So, but of course the tortoise was very smart. The tortoise didn't actually stretch out any of his limbs or his neck, and because the jackal sensed that, waited for too long, so he lost interest and just left. And that's why the Buddha actually tells the monks, in the same way, this Mara, is actually continuously and ceaselessly, hovering around you. This Mara, he's always hanging around you, okay? And this Mara is trying to find an opportunity, whether it is through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, or the body, to actually invade you, and to invade you with what? Invade you, with the kilesas, right? With the taints, of greed, hatred, and delusion, which is actually the kilesas, So he will try to invade you with this lobha, dosa, and moha, so that you actually be pulled towards it, and commit all these actions that will cause you to create new karma, right? Because you act based on lobha, dosa, moha. There's new karma, and this is what Mara wants you to do, so that you remain in samsara, for the longest time, and also the Buddha also tells the monks that this Mara itself, is trying to do its best, to actually ensure that you are caught, through the six sense doors. So the Buddha tells the monks that you should dwell, with doors to your senses well guarded, Okay. So from here we see that the Buddha says, in order for you to guard your mind, first of all, you must establish your sati, in the six sense doors, through this parable, through this simile, of the tortoise that the Buddha had actually given, And the Buddha actually tells, the Buddha actually further tells the monks, actually how do you actually, establish your sati in the six sense doors. The Buddha says, when you actually see a form with the eye, do not grasp or do not be attached to the signs and features, of the form that you have seen, And when you hear a sound with the ear, do not actually be attached, or do not be attached, and grasp, at the sound that you hear, whether it's a pleasant, unpleasant sound, right? Do not grasp at it. And when you smell, an aroma, a smell of fragrance, an aroma, whether it is pleasant, unpleasant with the nose, or whether you taste a flavor with your tongue, whether it's something that's pleasant or unpleasant, and whether you touch a tactile sensation with the body, or whether you actually think of something, cognize an idea with the intellect, you should not also be attached, and grasp, at these sense objects that come into contact with your sense bases. Okay. So here the Buddha actually says, for you to guard your mind, you have to first of all, establish your sati in the six sense doors. Okay, again, in this Anguttara Nikaya 4.14, again, the Buddha actually highlights, what is actually, restraint, in order for you to practice restraint. The Buddha again highlights that there are four striving, like I mentioned before, and this, the first striving is actually striving of restraint, okay? And restraint itself, the Buddha says, how do you practice restraint? Again, the Buddha actually highlights, but you have to actually anchor, your sati in the six sense doors. When you see a form, do not grasp at it, and when you hear something, or when you smell something, when you taste something, the Buddha says, do not actually look at the signs and features. Okay, do not be attracted, and do not be pulled, and do not actually get attached, to this, to whatever that comes to you through the six sense doors. Okay, so here the Buddha actually has taught us, first of all, in meditation, right, the Buddha says, if anything that comes to your senses and you actually know, that lobha, dosa, moha has arisen in your mind, the first thing the Buddha asks you is actually not to pay attention to the signs and features. Means it's actually a samatha practice, right? If you look at it, because when you know that your mind is burning with anger or greed because you see something, or when you hear something, someone actually says something unpleasant about you, you feel that your mind is boiling with anger, right? or you find that, your mind is filled with a lot of lust or greed, because, you come into something that's pleasant, So the Buddha says the first thing to do is what? Do not actually pay attention to signs and features. And that is actually what the Buddha is teaching us to practice, which is actually samatha. And if you think about it, it is actually very in line with what psychologists tell us, right? When you are angry, the psychologists will tell you, count, just maybe watch your breath, or do something else, or try to actually distract your mind. Maybe you look at the scenery, a nice scenery, and try to, and perhaps look at some photos, of that will bring back fond memories, and do something, or maybe do just house chores, and do something else, and rather than focus on this anger itself. So the Buddha says, do not actually focus, and pay attention to these signs and features. So that itself is samatha practice, So the Buddha has actually taught us the first thing to do is to make sure you restrain yourself, and that itself is samatha. Again, in this sutta, in this Majjhima Nikaya 33, again the Buddha actually talks about 11 qualities, that a cowherd, if he doesn't have these 11 qualities, then he cannot actually make the cattle. He's not able to take care of the cattle properly and make it prosperous. Okay, so then the Buddha actually makes a comparison. Of course, the Buddha talks about the 11 qualities of this cowherd. Then the Buddha talks about, similarly, if the monk possesses these 11 qualities, he cannot become, want to reach growth and increase in this Dhamma and discipline. So, which means if you have these 11 qualities, you cannot possibly grow in the Dhamma. Okay, and the Buddha says how a monk is one who does not actually. The Buddha says if you actually have these 11 qualities, and one of the qualities, if you see from here, is that this monk does not actually have sense restraint. Okay, when he actually sees a material shape with the eye, and he's actually entranced by it, he's actually very, very attracted by it, by its appearance as well as detail, So signs and features, he pays attention. Whenever he sees something that is really interesting, he actually tries to find out more, and he's drawn to it. So the Buddha says that this monk is like somebody who does know how to dress a sore. When you have a sore, you need to dress, right? You need to do a dressing. So the Buddha says that if your mind is really, in your mind that there is really lobha, dosa, and moha in you. So it's like your mind already has a sore, and you need to dress it, right? You need to put dressing to the mind, right? So the Buddha says the first thing to do is what? Do samatha first, right? Make sure that you do not actually pay attention to these signs and features, Calm yourself down first, and guard, this organ of sight, Guard your eye base, And you have to control and guard the eye base by not paying attention to it. Same thing when you hear a sound, or smell something that's nice, or taste something that's nice, or touch, with the body, or you think of something that's really nice. The Buddha says, do not be pulled by it, and do not also be repelled by it. It doesn't mean that all the time it's only about pulling, about nice things, even unpleasant things as well. Say, for example, someone actually says something, unpleasant about you, and you feel really angry to it about what is said. And if you think about it, this dosa also actually has the power to actually attach you, right? Because you keep thinking about the person, right? You keep thinking about, why did he actually say that about me? Why did he say that? It's not true, So your mind becomes very attached, very disturbed, and you keep on boiling within you, like, why was that said about me, which is not true? So your mind it's very affected, and you find that you're drawn, and you become actually very attached, to this. You cling to it. You cling to this anger. So the first thing first, the Buddha says is to make sure you practice samatha. And the Buddha says first thing to do is don't pay attention to it. Don't pay attention to the details and and the features and attention. Do something else. Pay attention to your other six sense bases. Perhaps you watch your body. whether it's hot or whether your heartbeat, is actually beating very fast. You feel yourself getting very warm or feverish because you feel very angry, Or you can also watch your breath, and anything other than, this anger, there's actually overflowing in your mind. So we know that the Buddha actually has asked us to make sure that we don't pay attention to the signs and features, and that itself is actually the samatha practice to calm yourself down first. But that's not the end of the story, because from Majjhima Nikaya 39, we find that there's this interesting sutta also, that the Buddha actually spoke about, and this happened. The Buddha was actually in Angas and in the town called Asapura, and here the Buddha actually tells the monks that, he says, you call yourself, he tells the monks, okay, he tells the monks, monks, you call yourselves contemplatives, you call yourself samanas, but do you actually deserve, to be called samanas or not? What is it that you do that you actually deserve, the designation called samana, or, a recluse, What is it that you practice in order for you to actually deserve that designation, And how do you ensure that lay people, when they offer robes, alms, food, and lodging and medicine to you, that these will actually bring great fruits to the lay people, and great reward. And how do you ensure that you're going forth in the Dhamma Vinaya will not be barren, but fruitful and fertile? Okay. So the Buddha says, in order for you to be a samana, you need to actually guard your doors of the sense faculties, and you must not actually grasp any themes or variations, through your six sense doors. So whenever you see anything that's pleasant, unpleasant, do not be attached to them. Just don't pay attention. Focus your attention on something else and focus your mind on other six sense doors, to calm yourself down. The Buddha actually calls this as what we call the dynamic samadhi. It's actually different from the stationary samadhi, when you actually sit cross-legged and watch your in-breath and out-breath when you do anapanasati, or when you actually watch your abdomen rising and falling, in the Mahasi method, right? So that itself is different. That itself is basically what we call static samadhi, But when you actually let your sati be anchored in the sixth sense door, that itself is what we call the dynamic samadhi. It is also able to calm yourself down. So the Buddha is actually asking the monks to actually guard the sense doors, because it's very important, because we are faced with all these challenges in our daily lives, when we are bombarded with all sorts of pleasant, unpleasant things, not just in a meditation retreat, but every day in our lives, we face all this. So the Buddha says, first thing first, you must make sure that you actually, focus on you make sure you do not actually grasp, at the signs and features, whether it is any of the six sense doors. The Buddha actually tells the monks, do not actually grasp, at this, and do not actually cling to all these sense objects that bombard you. So only then, the Buddha says that you can call yourself a samana, because if not, the Buddha says if anybody scolds you and you scold back, or anybody abuses you, you abuse back, then you're actually not a samana. You're not a recluse, and you're definitely not following what the Buddha is teaching. So we know that the first thing to do is make sure you practice samatha first to calm yourself down. But is this really the end of the practice? But the Buddha says no. If you look at Samyutta Nikaya 35.247, again, the Buddha gave this really, I find really wonderful talk, about sense restraint here. Here the Buddha actually gave an example here. They say, suppose that a man wounded and festering, right, will go to a swampy jungle, and there is this sharp-bladed grasses, okay, that pierce his feet, and thorns will scratch his festering sores. Means that there is this man that actually goes into a swampy jungle, and a lot of this, blade of grasses which are actually sharp, and it pierce, his festering sores. And he will experience pain and unhappiness, right? Okay, so in the same way, if a certain monk, he goes to a village, right, and actually, the people in the village actually start to scold him and abuse him, and tell him that you're not practicing rightly, and your sila is actually not properly practiced, and you're not a good monk, and because of that, that itself is like being cut by the blade of grasses, right? Okay, knowing this to be a thorn, okay, the Buddha says that that this monk should actually practice restraint to ensure, that he's able to overcome, the suffering, okay, the difficulties. So the Buddha says in order for you to do that, you need to understand what is restraint and lack of restraint, okay? Of course, the Buddha actually talks about the same thing which he has actually told the other monks in the other suttas in terms of how to exercise restraint, right, over the six sense doors. In terms of when you see the eye, when you see something with the eye, hear something with the ear, or smell something with the nose or tongue, or touch something, with the body, or we think something with the intellect, so make sure that you do not pay close attention to the signs and features. Okay. So the Buddha here actually gave a simile. He actually gave a simile of 6 animals, and if you actually catch these 6 animals, and tie them together through, with a strong rope. For example, you catch a snake, a crocodile, a bird, dog, or hyena, and monkey. Right? You tie them with a strong rope. And then you actually tie them together, with a strong rope, and you just tie a knot in the middle, and you let them just go each on their own way, okay? And of course, once you actually release them, the snake and all these animals will just run, according to its habitats and inclinations, right? The snake will want to go to the anthill, the crocodile will want to go to the water, and the bird, fly to the air, and dog to the village, and the hyena will go to the charnel ground, and the monkey will want to go to the forest. So each of these animals will try to pull according to its own habitat, right? Okay. So once these animals become internally exhausted, right? So whichever is the strongest animal, they will pull the other animals towards that direction, right? Okay. So in the same way, the Buddha says, if you do not practice restraint, in your 6 sense doors, whenever something impinges on your sense door and you feel, that you are being pulled by these 6 sense doors, the sense object in the 6 sense doors, then the Buddha says then you are actually like these 6 animals. You are being drawn, by these 6 sense objects, and because of that, lobha, dosa, moha arise in you, and because of that, you actually you don't guard your sankhara, your intention, and you just create new unwholesome karma because of that. So the Buddha says that is actually lack of restraint. And then the Buddha then explains again what is restraint. Okay, here we see that the Buddha again he highlights the 6 sense doors, but he has actually added something that is very different in this sutta. He says when you see a form with the eye, and when you see the form with the eye, this person who has restraint, right, is not obsessed with the pleasing form, and he's not repelled by unpleasing form. And how do you actually do that? How do you practice that? The Buddha says, in addition to samatha practice, right, where you actually do not focus on the signs and features, here the Buddha says he discerns, and as it actually is present, the awareness release. The discernment release, okay? So here, other than samatha, you also need to have wisdom in order for you to overcome, in order for you to not to be attached to the 6 sense doors, you also need to be able to use wisdom, as the tool, for you to overcome the attachments at the 6 sense doors. So the Buddha says that you must use wisdom in order for you to, overcome, the defilements that arise in you when these 6 sense doors impinge on your, in your sense doors. So the Buddha says, in order for you to do that, you must practice wisdom, which is actually vipassana here. Okay, and he says that if you practice this with wisdom, then you will actually achieve what we call the awareness release, which is liberation by mind. Okay, and discernment release is actually liberation by wisdom. So the Buddha says that you must actually apply wisdom, and in order for you to overcome, this defilements that arise in you through the six sense doors. In order for you to restrain yourself, this samatha is just something temporary. Okay, it doesn't give you the true uprooting of the defilements. In order for you to uproot defilements, you must actually apply wisdom, and such that you'll be able to achieve liberation by mind and liberation by wisdom. Okay, these two go hand in hand. If somebody who actually has got liberation by mind, it must come together with liberation by wisdom. So when you actually have all this wisdom, right, then these unskillful mental qualities will actually utterly cease without remainder. Okay, so the Buddha in this sutta is interesting because not just about samatha, you also need to make sure that you also practice vipassana, through discernment, through applying wisdom. Okay, when you hear a sound, when you smell something, when you taste something, when you touch something, make sure that you apply. First of all, you apply samatha to calm yourself down. Then after that, you apply wisdom in order for you to uproot the kilesa completely. So here the Buddha gives a different example. Here the six animals, the Buddha still talks about the six animals, but instead of just tying them, with a knot, the Buddha says you should tie the six animals around a strong post, and let the animals run around the strong post. Okay, so once the animals, you see the last sentence here, you tether them to a strong post or stake. So let the animals run around the stake, this strong post. Instead of just tying a knot, you put a strong post. Okay, so these six animals, of course, they will start to pull each other, right? Okay, the snake and all this will go to the anthill, crocodile will go to the water, the bird will go to the air, and so on and so forth. But we see, since they are running around this strong post, they will become exhausted, and after a while, they will just sit and lie down next to the post or next to the stake, because your stake is very firm. Okay, here the Buddha says, that's why the Buddha says, in order for you to apply wisdom, first of all, you actually must have strong mindfulness. That strong state is like a mindfulness. So once you have established a strong state of mindfulness, over your six sense doors, then you are able to apply, first of all, samatha and vipassana in order for you to uproot, all these defilements that arise in you. Okay. That's why the Buddha says, how do you practice this wisdom? Okay, the Buddha then further talks about in the sutta, which I find really quite remarkable. The Buddha is able to, give such a detailed, and structured teaching. That then he further talks about how do you ensure that you practice wisdom. The Buddha says you practice wisdom by practicing mindfulness immersed in the body. Okay, in terms of these six sense doors, you apply this mindfulness immersed in the body. But actually, this translation, immersed in the body itself, is not quite correct. If you look at a lot of translations, they actually translate it as immersed in the body. But actually, I went to look for the original Pali text for this sutta, in Sutta Central, and I actually did a comparison in between the Pali version and the English version. If you look at the last sentence of the sutta, for the English translation says, that's how you should train yourselves. We will steadily consolidate. You should train yourselves. We will develop mindfulness immersed in the body. So I tried to look for the Pali equivalent for this, and actually, this immersed in the body, the Buddha actually uses the word kayagata no sati, kayagata no sati, or kayagata sati. Okay, this is the practice that the Buddha actually has taught, in order for you to practice vipassana. So a lot of translators actually use kaya to mean body, but if you actually attend Bhante Agachita's workshop, you will know that this kaya itself is actually not body, but instead it is actually the mind. So that's why in this sutta, actually what the Buddha is asking us to practice is mindfulness immersed in the mind. That means you must actually watch your mind very carefully, in order for you to know, what has arisen in your mind, right? For example, when you see something, when you hear something, how does your mind respond to these six sense doors? For example, if greed has arisen, then you must know the mind consciousness, right? That greed has arisen, and you must also be aware what is the sankhara, arising from this this greed. What do you intend to do? What is your intention? Do you intend to do anything that breaks the 5 precepts? Or if there's anger in your mind, do you actually intend to actually scold back or abuse back? So the Buddha says this kayagata no sati is very important, because you must watch your mind carefully, how it's responding to the six sense doors. And that itself is actually how you actually practice vipassana, in relation to the six sense doors. So you see, what the Buddha actually gives is such a wonderful and holistic path of practice to us. It is actually very complete if you read the suttas in terms of how we should actually practice to actually overcome, to actually uproot our defilements. The Buddha has given a very systematic way, how you should actually respond, whenever the sixth sense, whenever something that comes into your contact with your six sense doors, how you should do. First of all, don't actually pay attention to signs and features. Let yourself calm down. After that, then you look at, you actually, you contemplate, by using this kayagata sati, how does it respond? Oh, there's anger. How does this anger arise? Then you actually analyze you actually contemplate from there, and you see the condition arising. And that's where you're able to let go of these defilements that arise in your mind. And here in SN 35.512 again, the Buddha again highlights the importance of watching the mind. The Buddha says, if you monks, if you can just watch your mind, whether lobha, dosa, or moha arises in you, then the Buddha says that you are capable of attaining enlightenment in this very lifetime itself. So this Ati Nuko Pariyoyo Sutta, right? The Buddha again affirms that watching your mind, is actually very important. So again, in this book of one, in this Kayagata Sati, right? Okay. The Buddha again highlights this practice of watching the mind, and also watching, how your mind responds to the six sense doors in terms of watching the mano vinyana, which is the mind consciousness, and also the sankhara, the intention, right? The Buddha says if you practice this, you can actually abandon ignorance, and you can abandon, mana, the conceit, and you are able to realize the fruit, all the way from Sotapatti up to Arahantship, just by doing this Kayagata Sati, So this is emphasized by the Buddha in this book of ones in Anguttara Nikaya. If you practice this, it is of abundant benefits if you can practice this Kayagata Sati. That's why in Anguttara Nikaya 4.170, we find that this Venerable Ananda says, during the Buddha's time, whoever was attained Arahantship, they would come and report to Venerable Ananda, and all these monks will tell Venerable Ananda that I have attained Arahantship, through 4 ways. Firstly is he actually practiced samatha first, then vipassana, and then the other one is they actually practice vipassana, then samatha. Okay, and then the other one, the third way is where they practice samatha and vipassana together. And then, of course, the fourth one is when there's restlessness concerning the Dhamma. So you can see here, it is very consistent. All the suttas they interweave so beautifully. Everything is so consistent in terms of what the Buddha has taught. In terms of your six sense doors, in terms of how you watch using samatha vipassana, and what is being reported by monks who attain, arahantship, it is actually very, very consistent. And if you look at Majjhima Nikaya 148, right, 6 sets of 6, again, this is where the Buddha actually merged the six sense doors with the 5 aggregates, because Buddha has actually highlighted, okay, you must actually practice restraint by watching, by watching the six sense doors, watching the mind, how it reacts. But how do you integrate that into your five aggregates? Okay, because the Buddha's teaching is that, if you even want to attain Sotapatti, you must actually contemplate your five aggregates as anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So how do you integrate these six sense doors into the five aggregates? And this is where we can see in Majjhima Nikaya 148, right? The Buddha actually tells you how you should actually merge the six sense doors with the five aggregates. So in this case, the Buddha says, whenever you see something with your eye, right, okay, then you must actually know what happens to your mind. For example, maybe you see something that's actually pleasant, or maybe I give the example, or you actually hear something that's unpleasant, and because of that, the anger arises in you, So the Buddha says you should actually analyze how this anger arises. Okay, this anger arises, because because of the thought I have, the thought maybe, you feel that, why is it that this was being said about me, which is not true? And how does this thought arise? It's actually because of perception, you feel that, this perception, you know that somebody has spoken unpleasant things about you, and this perception arises because of unpleasant feeling. And unpleasant feeling arises because of contact. And how does contact arise? It's because of ear consciousness. And ear consciousness arises because of sound and ear. So because of this, the Buddha says that these six sets of six must actually be understood, very clearly. It's because if you actually understand the six sets of six, then basically, you are also contemplating the five aggregates. Because if you look at it, the anger itself is actually, your sankhara, right? Because it's actually a volition that arises in you. And if you look at it, the thought itself is also a sankhara. And then you know that the perception, is actually how you perceive something has been spoken about you. And you also contemplate about feelings, feelings because there's unpleasant feeling. And you also contemplate about your eye, and also your eye consciousness. So basically, you are actually contemplating the five aggregates, when you actually observe, your six sense doors, through this way that the Buddha says. So again, the Buddha actually, again, in MN 146, there's also this interesting sutta, where Venerable Nandaka was actually giving a talk to the nuns. And again, he gave this example of showing, how non-self can be explained, because when you contemplate the six sense doors, and contemplate the five aggregates through dependent arising, then you find that everything, is actually non-self. It's actually all dependent arisen. And from this MN 146, again, we see, that this sutta talks about, this Venerable Nandaka, he actually gave a discourse to the nuns, and he actually told the nuns that, look at the oil itself that's burning, and the light, that you see from the oil lamp itself is actually dependent on dependent on a lot of conditions, like the wick, the oil, and the fire itself. So if any of these conditions, is not there, then you find that the oil, the fire itself also is extinguished. So the Buddha says, so Venerable Nandaka says that itself is actually non-self. You can't actually have a fire that actually exists without conditions. And very much like a shadow, from the tree, a shadow actually is formed because of the tree trunk as well as the sun. And because of that, the shadow is formed. So if the sun or the tree is removed, then the shadow is also removed as well. So that itself is conditionally arisen. So we find that if we practice it in this way, through the five sense basis, through the six sense doors, but you also integrate it with the five aggregates, then you find that you will be practicing, in accordance with this SN 22.122, where this Venerable Sariputta tells this Venerable Kotita, that if you actually contemplate the 5 aggregates as non-self, anicca, dukkha, and anatta, in this way, through contemplating the 5 aggregates through the 6 sense doors, then it's possible that you realize the fruit of stream entry. Okay. Again, the Buddha also confirms in AN 4.45 to this Rohitasa, that there was this Deva, right, at one time, when he was still a human, he was actually an ascetic, and he had psychic power, and he actually traveled very, very far away in the universe, He flew very far distances in the universe to find out whether there was a place where people do not grow old and die. Okay, he said he traveled long distances because he could fly, and but yet he still could not find a place in the world, in the universe, where one does not grow, does not get born and does not grow old and die. So this Rohitasa, right, he became a Deva. One day he came down and asked the Buddha. He says, that is there any place in the universe where people don't grow old and die, where we just remain as we are and we don't die? The Buddha says, I say, friend, by traveling, you can travel for as far as you want, to the entire universe, but you will not find a place where one is not born and does not grow old and die. The Buddha says, the only way, for you to find a place where people do not grow old and die is within this fathom long body. This fathom long body means that this 6 foot long body with our perceptions and mind, that this the world, the origin of world, cessation of world, and leading to cessation of world, can be realized. So it is in this body itself that you can actually realize the deathless. By traveling far distances in the universe, you can never actually come to this place where you find out that nobody grows old and dies. So you can see here, the Buddha actually highlights again and again the importance of self-restraint. And as I mentioned just now, it is not only for monastics or monks and nuns, but it's equally important for lay people as well. Whenever we do perform dana, sila, or bhavana, make sure that we are restrained. You do not let these thoughts of greed, hatred, or delusion, to invade your mind. You must guard your sense doors. Because if you don't actually, you're not restrained. How are you going to actually observe your 5 precepts? Before you know it, you have already you broken your 5 precepts. So the 6 sense doors are indeed very important for us to have sense restraint. So here we find that the Buddha has actually given us a path in terms of the samatha and vipassana practice, and if you look at the suttas, right, it is actually very, very beautiful in that everything is so consistently interwoven together. Like when you see Satipatthana in Sutta MN10, when the Buddha asks you to contemplate the mind, the feeling, the body, the feelings, the mind, and the mind objects. That's exactly what the Buddha has taught, in the suttas, earlier, where he talks about the 6 sense bases, in terms of how we apply samatha and vipassana, in a practice. And also, anapanasati, is also very useful, because anapanasati, when you practice anapanasati, you are actually practicing the static samadhi. Okay, you're sitting down and you are just watching your breath, and you're trying to gain composure. But the Buddha says anapanasati is not just about watching breath, but you must open your mind, and watch the 6 sense doors once your mind has come down. That is actually in SN 118. So you see, the Buddha's teaching is not just about watching phenomena come and go. It's not just looking at looking at anger, then it disappears, or looking at greed, then it angers, then comes back to your breathing and rising and falling. The Buddha is not teaching about that. The Buddha says this watching of impermanence or anicca is important, but you must continue to contemplate until you see non-self, how actually each one, is interrelated, and arise through causes and conditions, and how they are dependently arisen. Then only then you'll be able to see non-self and emptiness, in all the sankhara, in all the phenomena. Then only then you'll be able to achieve the various stages, where you uproot the fetters. Otherwise, you're just sharpening you're just sharpening your sati and sampajanya. You're basically your mindfulness as well as clear comprehension. But there is actually no wisdom if you don't see non-self. Non-self is actually the crown jewel of what the Buddha has taught. If you look at it, scientists have actually applied this principle of causation, in all the inventions, right? For example, they use, like in physics, they use, force, is mass times acceleration. They use this principle of causation to actually invent propellers for aeroplanes, even send rockets to the moon, by using the principle of causation. Even when it comes to chemistry, if you look at science, like maybe you put metals in water, how they react to each other to form the hydroxide or gas. All these are actually based on principles of causation, but scientists just invented causation, but they do not actually see non-self. It's only the Buddha has actually discovered non-self, and that itself is what it is actually the secret that will enable us to free ourselves and be liberated from samsara. That is the secret, and that is the only way, for us to uproot all the fetters, for us to get out of samsara. Otherwise, we are just not practicing correctly. Okay. Here you see, I just want to share with you what the Buddha says in this Samyutta Nikaya 35.94. So the Buddha says, if you are able to practice this self-restraint, in yourself, the Buddha says just 6 bases of contact. You need to actually ensure that you guard your 6 sense bases for contact. If you do not, where one unrestrained meets with suffering, those who know how to restrain them, dwell uncorrupted and faith their partner. Okay. So the Buddha says, if you see a form that delight the mind, okay, having seen those that give no delight, if you see something that is delightful, and then you see also something that gives you, that is not delightful, means it's unpleasant, so dispel the path of lust towards the delightful. Means if it's something that you like, do not have lust or greed towards the delightful, and do not soil your mind by thinking that, oh, this one is displeasing to me. So when you see something that you like, do not be pulled, and do not be pulled, and by delight. And if you see something that's not delightful, also do not soil your mind by saying, oh, I don't like this. So it's like you like something and you don't like something, then itself you're not self-restrained. Okay, and the Buddha again says, if you hear a sound that is actually pleasant, and also a sound that is actually really noisy and unpleasant, and same thing also the Buddha says, do not be enthralled, with pleasant sound, and do not be, which means do not actually be pulled and enticed by the pleasant sound, and do not actually, dispel your mind, soil your mind, by saying that, oh, this sound is actually displeasing to me. Okay, and then when you actually smell something that's fragrant, also, and also when you smell something that's, when you actually smell a stench, okay, also, dispel aversion towards a stench, and do not yield or desire for the lovely. Okay, same goes for taste as well. Same goes for taste. Whenever you say something, taste something that's sweet or bitter, also do not be, do not actually be swayed by this like or dislike, or you cling to it, or you actually are repelled by it, So the Buddha says, even when it comes to touch as well, the same thing as well. Pleasant touch, and all this, and unpleasant touch, if you must have self-restraint, do not have, do not have this do not have this inclination to say whether you like or dislike. Okay, so that's why the Buddha says, the worldlings or the common people, of proliferated perception, they perceive and proliferate, they become engaged. So having dispelled every mind state bound to the home life, one travels on the road of renunciation. If you are able to restrain your mind, and be able to dispel, all the kilesas, that actually arise in your mind through the practice which I just mentioned to you, the samatha and vipassana, then you're on the road to renunciation. And when the mind is developed, in this through this six sense basis, then the mind does not, it never flutters anywhere. So having vanquished lust and hate, bhikkhus go to the far shore beyond birth and death. So the Buddha is saying, that if you practice these six sense doors of restraint, then you'll be able to overcome lust and hate and go to the far shore of birth and death. And I will of course encourage you, to practice, what the Buddha has actually taught in terms of anchoring your mind in the six sense doors, and contemplate the five aggregates. So if you continue doing this, then you'll be able to uproot all the fetters. You'll be able to realize, the condition arising of all these phenomena, and you'll be able to realize this principle of non-self anatta, at a very profound level. Then, I'm sure, you actually be on the path. And you'll be able to, achieve, uproot the fetters and achieve, even Sotapatti in this lifetime itself. And of course, once you achieve Sotapatti, then you'll be able to get out of this samsara up to 7 lifetimes. And, that itself, is something that is really, really important for us to take note, so that we do not live our lives as human beings in vain. When the Buddha Sasana, is still available, make sure, we take heed of what the Buddha has taught us in terms of being restrained in our body, speech and mind through the establishing your sati at all times, through the six sense doors, guarding your mind, how it reacts to the to the sense objects, and how you actually contemplate the five aggregates from there as non-self, and anatta. From there, you'll be able to, you grow dispassion, and you will not actually cling on so much, to whatever that affects you. Then you actually become less affected, and you become, very, very stable, and in the Dhamma, and your mind actually does not actually get affected so easily, and you suffer less, and sooner or later, you'll be able to, get out of samsara, by eradicating and uprooting all the fetters through the practice that the Buddha has actually taught.